how you're doing, and where Timmy, Ray and Lorraine, where are they at the moment?
What are you doing?
Sorry?
Welfare people come and got them.
The welfare people came and got them. Right. When was that?
About 4 or 5 weeks ago.
4 or 5 weeks ago. And have you been able to see them since?
No.
You've not been able to visit them or anything? And what did the welfare people say when they came to get them?
They said they have to do them and they couldn't leave any no more.
On a quiet September day in 2025, the dirt road into odd West Virginia filled with state cars instead of curious tourists. 3 people were led away from the sagging house at the end of that road. Ray Whittaker, 72, his sister Lorene, 79, and Lorene's son Timmy, 46. They did not resist. They could barely understand what was happening. All they knew was that strangers in uniforms were taking them from the only place they had ever called home. Left standing on the porch was Betty Whittaker, 73, tears in her eyes, saying the only thing she could, "I miss them a lot. I raised them." Online, people called them America's most inbred family. To millions, the Whittakers were a viral curiosity, faces and sounds on a screen. But to the state of West Virginia, Ray, Lorene and Timmy were something else. Vulnerable adults whose lives had crossed a legal line from hardship into active danger. This video is not about gawking at them. It's about understanding why the system decided that Betty, who loved them, who raised them, could no longer protect them. Odd West Virginia sits only about 75 miles from the state capital, but it might as well be another world. For decades, the Whittakers lived there in near total isolation, surrounded by collapsing structures and forest, far from regular social contact and formal support. The core family on the property were aging siblings: Betty, 73, Ray, 72, Lorene, 79, and Larry, 69, plus Timmy, 46, Lorene's son. Nearly all of them carried the burden of severe developmental disabilities linked to generations of consanguinity. They were mostly nonverbal, communicating through grunts, sounds, and gestures that outsiders struggled to interpret. To understand what happened next, you have to see them first as what they are: a disabled, impoverished family, not a sideshow. So why did the state conclude that Betty couldn't keep them safe? The answer isn't one simple failure. It's 7 converging disasters that turned their home into a legal emergency. Together, they built a case that no amount of love from one exhausted woman could overcome. Reason 1. The house itself became a threat. By the time reporters returned to the Whittaker property after the removal, what they saw was more than clutter. It was structural collapse in slow motion. The place was described as a scatter of collapsing structures: broken trailers wearing the weather like a permanent bruise, a chicken coop caving in, and a main house whose siding had been warped by seasons of rain and sun. In the yard, piles of old tires, crushed beer cans, chipped buckets, sagging refuse bins, and debris made the ground itself hazardous. This wasn't a bad week. It was decades of decay. For people with limited mobility, poor eyesight, and profound intellectual disabilities, that environment meant constant risk of trips, falls, and injury. It was the first clear sign that under Betty's watch, the physical world they lived in had become dangerous. Reason 2. Inside, the air and the food could kill. The danger wasn't just outside. Reporters who entered the house described the air as thick with the smell of gas from a stove. In a wooden structure occupied by elderly and cognitively impaired adults who cannot reliably understand or respond to danger, that smell isn't just unpleasant. It is evidence of an immediate risk of explosion or poisoning. Under West Virginia law, an emergency means a situation presenting a substantial and immediate risk of death or serious injury to a vulnerable adult. The gas alone brought the Whittaker home frighteningly close to that definition. Then there was the sanitation failure. Food, beans and sausage, sat out on counters, congealing as flies moved across the surfaces. The family still relied on an outside outhouse for human waste, forcing elderly and disabled people to navigate a dilapidated yard day and night just to use the bathroom. For 3 vulnerable adults in their 70s and 40s, these were not minor inconveniences. They were ongoing health hazards that, in the eyes of Adult Protective Services, proved that the most basic care needs were not being met. Reason 3. Violence entered the home, and Betty couldn't stop it. As the world's attention turned to the Whittakers, new people came into their orbit, and not all of them were safe. One of the most critical figures in the story is Betty Jo B.J. Whittaker, 47, Larry's daughter, who lived with the family for a time. According to interviews Betty later gave, B.J. was frequently on drugs and had physically attacked Ray, Lorene, and Timmy. Betty did something many people never hear about. She went to court and filed for a protective order to keep B.J. away from the vulnerable adults. But the judge dismissed the case. B.J. was legally allowed to return, and the alleged abuse continued. In the months that followed, reports surfaced of signs of abuse to the vulnerable members, and confirmation that B.J. is still on drugs. The home was no longer just neglected, it was violent. Whether Betty participated in that abuse or simply failed to protect the others from it, the legal conclusion was the same. Her role as protector had been breached. Reason 4. Betty's body and age could not carry the weight anymore. By 2025, Betty was 73 years old. On paper, she was the capable one, the person without obvious intellectual disability, the one who knew how to talk to outsiders. But she was also a frail elderly woman trying to care for 3 profoundly disabled adults between the ages of 46 and 79, all while living in deep structural poverty. Caring for even one adult with severe nonverbal autism is an exhausting full-time job. Here, Betty was expected to manage multiple disabled adults, complex medical needs, constant supervision, medication, food, hygiene, and a decaying property, with almost no outside help. The state's assessment was harsh but clear. Her physical and logistical capacity had fundamentally failed to meet the demands of their disabilities. Her love for them, expressed in that quiet plea, "I miss them a lot, I raised them," could not outweigh the objective reality of that failure. Reason 5. The money that could have helped them was stolen. When the Whittakers went viral after filmmaker Mark Lada's videos in 2020, viewers around the world started sending donations intended to repair the home, buy food, and support medical care. But according to local authorities, not all of that money got where it was supposed to go. A criminal investigation was opened into Patrick Rourke and Eric Carroll, individuals associated with filming, who were accused of fraudulently accepting donations on behalf of the Whittaker family. Under West Virginia law, financial exploitation is itself a form of harm to vulnerable adults. The research shows that Betty failed to act as a strong gatekeeper, allowing predators to divert funds meant for Ray, Lorene, and Timmy. That missing money might have meant no proper repairs, no reliable sanitation, no steady medical care. The state saw not just poverty, but poverty plus exploitation, all under the watch of a caregiver who could not protect the family's basic resources. Reason 6. When the system tried to help, trust broke down. Social services depend on at least some level of honesty from the people they're trying to help. But reports around the Whittaker case describe a pattern of deception inside the household. Documentation notes that Betty and Larry lied to Eric and Patrick, the same individuals involved in filming and resource distribution. This wasn't just casual fibbing. It convinced authorities that cooperative, in-home support was impossible. Adult Protective Services policy is built on using the least restrictive alternative, trying to keep vulnerable adults in their homes whenever it's safe. But when caregivers obstruct, mislead, or hide what's really going on, the state eventually has only one option left: removal. The quiet, non-consensual extraction of Ray, Lorene and Timmy, followed by secrecy about their new location, was the ultimate sign that cooperation had failed. Reason 7. Viral fame turned their home into a cage of cameras. For most of their lives, the Whittakers had been hidden from the world. After 2020, that changed overnight. Mark Lada's videos exploded online, and suddenly cars began driving down that dirt road just to see them. Neighbors reported people coming to film, photograph, or simply stare at the family's home, a phenomenon many commentators now call poverty tourism. The attention was relentless. New YouTube channels, social media pages, and commentators built content and sometimes profit around the family's image and suffering. Larry himself linked the eventual state intervention directly to this exploitation, saying authorities stepped in because there were people out there making money off them, and officials don't like it. For Ray, Lorene, and Timmy, nonverbal, cognitively impaired, and now globally recognizable, this wasn't fame. It was harassment. It created security risks, emotional distress, and constant intrusion that Betty had no real way to control. In the legal analysis, her failure to shield them from this hostile exposure became one more environmental hazard she couldn't eliminate. All of these threads, squalor, gas leaks, violence, exhaustion, theft, deception, and viral harassment, came together in the cold language of West Virginia law. Ray, Lorene, and Timmy were formally classified as vulnerable adults, unable to manage the basic activities of life or protect themselves. Neglect was defined as the unreasonable failure of a caregiver to maintain their safety and health. Emergency meant a substantial and immediate risk of death or serious injury. When Adult Protective Services arrived without asking permission, and when they refused to tell Betty where her family was taken, it was because, in their judgment, every one of those legal thresholds had been met. The state's duty shifted away from respecting household autonomy toward pure survival. There is one more piece that matters, especially if you're tempted to blame Betty for everything: the rumors. Online, people claimed that Betty herself beat Timmy, that she was the abuser. But when you go back to credible reporting and documented interviews, those accusations fall apart. The evidence points instead to BJ and others as the sources of physical harm. The research done on this case is clear. No reliable source confirms that Betty physically abused Ray, Lorene, or Timmy. What it does show is a woman who was distraught, pleading for her family, and overwhelmed by impossible circumstances. That doesn't erase her failures. Legally, Betty did fail. She presided over catastrophic environmental neglect, could not control violence in the home, allowed financial predators in, obstructed attempts at aid, and was unable to shield her vulnerable relatives from the crushing pressure of viral exposure. But morally, the story is more complicated. Her failures are tangled with structural poverty, disability, and a public that turned their suffering into entertainment. So when you comment on this video, pause before you type. Ask yourself, are we part of the problem when we click, laugh, or share without thinking about the people on the other side of the screen? Did viral fame help save Ray, Lorene, and Timmy by forcing the state to act? Or did it destroy the last fragile version of home they had? And what does justice look like for someone like Betty, who loved her family, said, "I miss them, I raised them," but was judged in the end not enough to keep them safe? If this story changed the way you see the Whittakers, or the way you see yourself as a viewer, tell that story in the comments. Keep it respectful. Keep it human. Because behind every shocking headline about America's most inbred family is a truth far more uncomfortable. A world that watched a family collapse and only called it an emergency when it was already too late.